The Samsung HW-S800D must be one of the slimmest soundbars I've ever come across. It has a 3.1.2 channel configuration and 330 watts of total power output. It also supports wireless Dolby Atmos and also Dolby Atmos and DTS:X over a wired connection. Now, at the time of filming and in the UK, it can be found between £580 and £650, while in the US it can be found for $700. In this review, you can see if it's actually worth its price tag and how it compares to some other soundbars that I've actually previously reviewed. So to kick things off, we have to talk about its overall design. And yes, indeed, the soundbar itself is extremely small. In my case, I've got it in front of the Samsung QE65QN95B, a 65-inch TV, and on a cabinet. Now, if you so wish, you can also wall mount it, which gives it a good sort of versatility. The dimensions of the soundbar will be on your screen alongside the small compact subwoofer, which houses a 6.5-inch woofer driver itself with an 8-inch passive radiator. Now, at the top of the soundbar, you might have noticed a few touch-sensitive buttons, and yes, indeed, they're not exactly my favorite, but nonetheless allow you to control certain settings, for example, the volume, or allow you to power on or off the soundbar. Better still, Samsung has included a very compact wireless remote, which also gives you further degree of controls. It is worth noting that if you're going to be adjusting certain settings from afar, for example, from the sofa, then there are a few little LEDs that do indicate, for example, going up or down, but there is no LCD display, so therefore you won't actually be aware of what you're actually adjusting other than hearing out for the audio cues. Now, for you to visualize what you're actually controlling and for further customization, you might want to get the Samsung SmartThings app. And through the main interface, you can actually see what it's connected to, although this also doubles up via the sound source menu. Then you've also got the volume controls, which you can adjust on the fly, and then you've got the sound modes that you can choose. Now, it's worth mentioning over here that you have got a bass and treble EQ only, for example, on likes of adaptive sound. If, however, you want further EQ controls, you want to go on the standard mode preset. And over here, you've got more customization, although the one I would suggest it is adaptive sound, and I'll touch upon why further down in this video. As for the woofer controls, you can adjust this. In my case, I've taken 2 notches off from the center position, and then I've left space fit sound and active voice amplifier disabled, equally with voice enhancement, night mode, and virtual. Again, I'll be touching upon this further down in the video, but this is also very subjective. As for the channel level, you can adjust the center and the front top. This will be dependent on your own room's acoustics. And then you've got the audio sync and also the voice guidance, which you can also adjust. Then you can adjust the Bluetooth pairing, in other words, to send it into Bluetooth pairing mode. And then you can also check in terms of the Wi-Fi that it's connected to, and also some further information, for example, if you do want to initiate a firmware update. I also like the fact that on this tab you've got the services. For example, if you want to find out some more information about some of the services that are offered with this soundbar, for example, Space Fit, it actually gives you a little bit of a breakdown as to what it actually provides and what it's actually compatible with. Now, for the app to work, the soundbar must support some sort of wireless connection, and indeed it does. First off, you have got Bluetooth, although the lowest quality SBC codec is supported only, and therefore you might want to use it sparingly. For example, if you've got friends or family who are coming over and just want to play back their favorite tracks, then they'll easily be able to do so. You've also got a tap sound function, which allows you to effectively quickly pair up via NFC straight to the soundbar. Now, better still, you have also got Wi-Fi. Not only does this allow you to play back music directly from, let's say, a Samsung television, but it also gives the ability of Apple AirPlay 2 and Google Chromecast to operate. And yes, both of them are actually supported. In my case, I use Google Chromecast as I've got an Android smartphone, and I use the PowerAmp app in order to play back my tracks which are locally stored, and also via the YouTube Music app, I could just quickly use Chromecast in order to directly send music to the soundbar. This made it really handy and just played back music at just a higher fidelity in comparison to just using Bluetooth. Now, aside from that, you have also got a micro HDMI port. So this is an eARC/ARC output to your television. And yes, in case you're wondering, you do have a micro HDMI to HDMI lead, which is included within the box. So you don't actually have to worry about purchasing a separate cable, so Samsung have actually thought about this. So it's no surprise to see this very small port included on the soundbar because it's extremely slim, and to the point where I don't even think a full-size HDMI port would actually really work on the soundbar. So in this respect, it's just worth considering that if you do want some other inputs into the soundbar, well, here you won't have any. This might be a cause for concern for those people who have, let's say, an older television which do not support the likes of Dolby Atmos or wireless Dolby Atmos, and as a result means that their Blu-ray player will not be able to be plugged into their soundbar to output that via their TV. Hopefully I'm making sense, but for those people who have older televisions, you might want to look elsewhere, at least if you do want to use Dolby Atmos and DTS:X. If you're not too concerned about this or you have a newer television, then it of course won't cause any sort of problems. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's go on to an audio demo. I'll be placing the microphone and camera in front of the soundbar, and I'll be going on to a music demo, which is from Priya J, and it's titled Like Me. Make sure you check out the annotations, which will be on your screen, to understand the different sound modes that the soundbar will actually be operating in. And then we'll be going on to a piece to camera where I'll be presenting the Peugeot 508 on Totally EV, and here I'll be enabling and disabling the voice enhancement feature. At the time of filming and in the UK, the 508SW starts from £45,000. However, if you want some extra grunt, you might want to go for the PSC model, which we actually have on review, and that starts from £55,000 without adding any additional options. So in this review, you can see if it's actually worth its price tag, and of course, how it compares to some of its key competitors. Now, to kick things off, we have to talk about electrification. And here it's quite intriguing to see that the estate model has got a lower battery pack claim than the fastback models. Indeed, here the Allure and the GT sit at 11.8 kilowatt hour. Now, I appreciate an audio demo over YouTube isn't quite ideal, but I thought I should provide it as it gives you a bit of a taster as to what to expect. Hopefully you're able to notice the differences between these sound modes, but I'll be expanding on this very shortly. Before doing so, I would just like to talk about the speaker configuration. And on the main soundbar unit itself, you have got forward and upward facing drivers on each extremity, and then you've also got a center audio driver, which combined output 130 watts of power. There is also 9 speakers to be more specific. As for the 10th audio driver, it is the 6.5-inch sideward-facing woofer that is positioned on the subwoofer, of course, and then you've got an 8-inch passive radiator. This is rated at 200 watts, and therefore the tally of the system is 330 watts. Now, just a small little mention over here is that I did notice certain reviewers and even users had positioned their subwoofers in different ways. In other words, forward-facing or rear-facing. But from what I can see from Samsung's website, the Samsung logo should be facing at the front, the power lead should be at the back, and therefore you have got the driver on the right-hand side and then the woofer on the left-hand side. At least you're placing it, for example, to the right side of the television. This seems to be what Samsung recommends, or indeed shows in some of their graphics. But feel free to play around with it your own heart's content. Now, in terms of the other features that the soundbar offers, you have got that wireless Dolby Atmos, which can be handy if you've got a modern Samsung television and you're using, for example, a streaming service that does actually support Atmos, and of course if your television supports it in the first place as well. So that can be handy in certain scenarios because it really does cut the cords. Elsewhere, you have got the active voice amplifier feature, which I didn't actually utilize, and including the SpaceFit Sound Pro. The latter effectively gives you a means of calibrating it with your room's acoustic. In my case, I didn't feel it actually made a difference, and the active voice amplifier might be handy, for example, if you have got, let's say, vacuum sound that comes in, then the soundbar will kind of try and counteract that. Not something that really bothers me, but of course, if that's something that you want to enable or disable, you can do so via the app, or indeed by going via the different sound modes via the remote control. Now, elsewhere, I should also mention that there's the Samsung Q Symphony feature, and previously I wasn't able to actually test this because I had an older Samsung television, but now with a newer Samsung television, I was actually able to put it through its paces, and I can safely say it does add a good sort of extra bit of immersion. The audio drivers that are positioned within the TV speaker work in conjunction with the soundbar, and therefore gives you a little bit of that extra immersive feel. It is worth noting over here, it's not going to be present on every Samsung television, so it's worth checking that yours is actually compatible compatible and newer enough. And of course, if you don't have a Samsung television, then this feature is going to be redundant to you. But just something I thought worth mentioning in case it's something you're going to be pairing up with a more modern device. Now, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the overall sonical performance of this soundbar. And I must say, I've actually been left pleasantly surprised. It is a really compact, slim soundbar, and despite its size, it does actually produce a really good sound. Now, first off, in terms of the sub-bass tones, in other words, that low-end rumble, that 6.5-inch woofer does do a decent job. You'll get a nice sort of low-end extension, for example, if you're listening to bass-orientated music, or indeed if you're watching some movies that have some explosions in them. It gives you that sense of connection with what you're actually watching. Now, make no mistake, it's not going to compete with bigger subwoofer systems out there, be it ones that are included with a soundbar setup, or indeed some aftermarket hi-fi solutions out there. Indeed, this is a very compact solution, so just put your expectations in check. If you're a real basshead, then this potentially might leave you a little bit disappointed. But I can say, as someone who listened to a lot of R&B and EDM tracks, it is actually something that left me pretty happy. Similarly over here, in terms of the overall mid-bass, the speakers that are positioned within the main soundbar unit do a phenomenal job, both in terms of the overall precision that they provide and also in terms of the quantity. Of course, you can EQ that if you so wish via the app or indeed via the remote control, but in my case, I actually found that in terms of its default configuration, the bass was plentiful. It didn't seem to be overpowering in the slightest. Now, as for the mid-range, it is slightly recessed, specifically in terms of the lower mids, and therefore it does affect vocal clarity. If you're listening to male or female vocals, it doesn't come out as much to the foreground. Now, it's not too bad in the grander scheme of things, but if you do compare it to soundbars at its price tag and therefore ones which are much larger and have got bigger audio drivers, those actually do a little bit of a better job. And there are some, for example, from the likes of Harman Kardon, Sonos, or even Samsung themselves that actually would be my preferred pick. But still, again, in the grander scheme of things and for a very compact soundbar, it does actually do a really impressive thing across the mid-range frequency band. Now, as for the highs, they extend relatively well at the top end. They don't sound too sibilant or harsh and therefore don't provide any sort of ear fatigue, all while providing you that sort of toe-tapping feeling. So truthfully, across the sound frequency range, I've actually been left pretty impressed. Now, as for the overall soundstage, despite it being actually a really slim, compact soundbar, the soundbar itself actually produces a really good engaging sound, which really took me by surprise because I was expecting something that would really lack the overall width and depth, and the overall instrument separation would be severely hampered, but that's not quite the case. While I was listening back to my favorite music tracks, or indeed watching movies, or indeed YouTube videos, I just found myself pretty engaged with the content that I was watching. Now, again, don't get me wrong, in comparison to larger soundbars out there with a higher driver configuration, it doesn't quite compete. But again, given the overall target market of this soundbar, I don't think many people will be left disappointed. Now, I should also have a quick word about the different sound modes, and you might have noticed that I actually prefer the adaptive sound mode. And yes, indeed, here I do feel that it does the best job because it brings the vocal clarity up to the foreground when it needs to, and it drops it, for example, if there's a bit more like bass and explosions that are happening in the background. So therefore, adaptive was my preferred mode, but you can go for the DTS Virtual X if you want a little bit more of that kind of enveloping sound, or if you want something that's a little bit more similar to a stereo output, for example, with a set of bookshelf speakers, you might want to go on the standard preset instead. Personally, I didn't really like the gain mode, and in terms of the voice enhancement, while it does bring out the mid-range to the foreground, it does seem to drown out the other frequency band, so it doesn't seem to be really good for a vast majority of content. But of course, if you're just watching podcasts or the news, then potentially the voice enhancement feature is something that you might want to enable. Now, with all that, I would just like to go on to a movie demo. I'll be playing Transformers Age of Extinctions, and I'll be flicking between Dolby Atmos and Dolby Digital. Make sure you check out the annotations on your screen to understand how these soundbars are. Now, the reason I provide that little movie demo is that you get a little bit of understanding as to how Dolby Atmos has a positive effect in terms of the overall sound reproduction that a soundbar can achieve. And indeed, that is the case with the S800D. Dolby Atmos really does bring everything into fruition, where you can hear the gunshots, the flying helicopter, and even explosions just a little bit better. It just feels a bit more immersive in comparison to using the likes of Dolby Digital or Dolby Surround. And effectively over here, if you have got the ability of using Dolby Atmos or DTS:X or even indeed wireless Dolby Atmos, then it's something that you might want to enable, at least if your content itself also supports it. Now ultimately what I'm trying to convey over here is that the overall sound reproduction of the HW-S800D is actually pretty impressive, at least for a slim, compact soundbar. By compact I mean that it is actually really slim and doesn't take that much space, but it is still quite an elongated piece of equipment. And in this respect, if you're looking for something like this, then I can't really think of a better alternative, at least something that actually does well across the sound frequency range and gives you that same sort of form factor. As a result of all this, it gets my Best Buy awards. But of course, do consider if this is not something that you're really looking at, or if you just want something that has got a little bit of better competencies across the sound frequency range, has a bigger subwoofer, for example, or even better capabilities with, for example, more connection options for yourself, then you might want to look at some larger soundbars out there, ones that are offered, for example, from the likes of Harman Kardon, Sonos, Samsung, JBL, among a few others, which I've reviewed and will be down in the description below for your own consideration. Now, with all that in mind, I'll be curious to know what you make of the S800D down in the comment section below. And of course, if you've enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing, and hitting that bell notification. All of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.